Hello, I'm Mark Wallace and I'm the tax partner for Walter Wright. We're an accountancy firm based in Hadley in Suffolk. This is part 3 of a series of presentations I'm doing to talk about the new reverse charge VAT scheme for those in the CIS industry. Part 1 talks about the detailed requirements and the more detailed points. Part 2 is if you are a subcontractor and talking about how it affects you. And part 3 is this presentation that talks about how it affects the person who is a contractor. So very briefly, what is the VAT reverse charge scheme? Well, in a nutshell, what it means is that from the 1st of March, if you are covered by these new rules, the contractor will no longer charge you VAT on the services that they supply to you. You might say, well, that's good. I'm not going to have to pay the VAT over to them. Well, that is correct. You won't pay VAT over to them, but you have to pay the VAT over to HMRC. At the same time, as I'll tell you, explain in a moment, you'll also reclaim the VAT from HMRC. So the net effect on your VAT return is nil. However, if you are a contractor and you have exempt supplies and you're only able to partially recover some of your VAT, so for example, you may also rent out properties and they're residential and therefore some of your VAT is being blocked, then it may be the case that you have to pay all the VAT over to HMRC and only a percentage of the VAT can be recovered. Overall, you'll be in the same position as if you were under the old scheme. It's just the fact that you're responsible for paying the subcontractor's VAT to HMRC and reclaiming the VAT in a normal way. Why has it been brought in? Well, it's been brought in because HMRC are aware of some subcontractors raising VAT invoices and then not paying the VAT over to HMRC, and there's actually criminal gangs, so I understand, going around profiting from it. And when does it apply? It applies from the 1st of March 2021. Now there are rules in place that talk about what happens if your suppliers straddle, but in very simple terms, 1st of March 2021 is the category. Now, as I say, the how if you're a subcontractor, part 2, this is part 3 that talks about how it applies to you if you are a contractor. You have to ask yourself 3 questions. The 3 questions are this. First of all, does the supply that you're receiving fall within the scope of the CIS? If you're a contractor, you'll be used to the fact that you have to check whether your subcontractor is registered for CIS, and you have to make monthly returns to HMRC of payments made to subcontractors. If you do that, and the supply that you're making to the subcontractor is already reported in CIS for income tax or corporation tax cases, then the VAT reverse charging system applies, and you will have to account for the VAT on the subcontractor's invoice, as I mentioned earlier on. Is the supply reduced rated 5% or standard rated? So if you've been charged VAT, again, the VAT reverse charge mechanism applies if it's covered by the CIS rules. And option 3, an end user. Now, an end user is a person who isn't making an onward supply of the services that you're receiving. So consider these 2 examples. You are a building company and you are going to be selling the house that is being built. Now, in that case, you are not an end user because you're supplying a product onto somebody else, and therefore the VAT reverse charge will apply. However, if, for example, they were building work on your own offices, obviously you're not going to sell your offices to anybody else. You're going to use the offices yourself. In that case, you are an end user. And what you need to do is you need to tell your subcontractor that you are an end user, and they will then charge you VAT in the normal way. So, you've answered those 3 questions. You've decided that the supply is subject to CIS. You've decided that there would be VAT chargeable if underneath the old regime because it was standard rated or reduced rated. And then you've decided that you're not an end user and you're making an onward supply. If they answer those questions like that, then the VAT reverse charge mechanism applies. That means that the subcontractor will no longer charge you VAT. So what do? Well, you pay over VAT to HMRC and then you reclaim the VAT, as I've mentioned already. But how do you account for it on your VAT return? Well, box 1, which is the output tax, you actually record the VAT that the supplier would have charged you. The supplier will be, and the contractor, its subcontractor, is required to tell you on the invoice how much that VAT is. So you pay that out to HMRC. Box 4, which is the input VAT that you can reclaim normally, again you put the value of that in that box. So you put the sale in the outputs, you put the purchase, if you like, in box 4. The net amount, unless you're partially exempt, means that you don't actually pay physically any cash to HMRC. Box 6 of the VAT shows the value of your sales. Now, interestingly, you do not include the net supply in box 6. You exclude it because if you think about it, you're not making a sale. All you're doing is accounting for somebody else's VAT. But you do put the value of the purchase in box 7, which is what you would normally do. So what is our advice? Well, firstly, you need to carry out some checks. You need to check that your supplier is validly registered for VAT. Now, you may well have done that anyway, but you need to make sure that is the case. Secondly, you need to tell the supplier that you're an end user, if you are, so that the normal rules apply, i.e. he charges you VAT. If you're not an end user, the reverse charge mechanism applies. Well, you might say, well, what if I get it wrong? Well, HMRC has said there'll be a light touch on penalties for the first 6 months of the system. So it comes in 1st of March, and you've got 6 months of them to make sure that you get it right. From then onwards, potentially the penalties could apply. Now, some people might say, well, hang on, if I'm paying VAT out to HMRC and then reclaiming VAT, surely there won't be any penalties. Well, in that case, probably there wouldn't be a penalty for doing that. But what about if it's the other way? What if the subcontractor still charges you VAT and you think, well, I've been charged VAT, but I think that really I should have accounted for the VAT on my return, but I'll reclaim it in the normal way? Well, arguably HMRC could come along at a later date and say, you reclaimed VAT, but it should have been underneath the new regime. Therefore, you've reclaimed VAT wrongly. We want that VAT back. And you're going to have to go to the subcontractor in order to get a refund of the money that's been paid. So potentially you could be open to a VAT liability for getting it wrong. So my advice is to make sure that you get it right from day one. Make sure that if it's reverse charge applies, you apply the VAT reverse charge. If it doesn't apply, then you get to charge VAT in the normal. There's a lot more detail on HMRC's website. The link is here. But if you have any questions, by all means, we are able to answer any questions. So my details are here. Contact me at the Multi Rights offices, and I'll see if I can help you. So thank you very much for listening and taking the time to watch this presentation.